The continued violence in many parts of the Middle East and North Africa has failed to deter Australian companies working and exporting there. In the latest violence, a NATO bombing raid killed 9 civilians in Tripoli, while in Damascus, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad made his third major speech in an attempt to quell mass protests against his rule. Historically, Australian companies exported agricultural commodities to the region, but with the rise of the petrodollar, more Australian companies are helping to build infrastructure, provide luxury goods and education services. The unrest has stymied some company plans for expansion, but for others, it's business as usual. Here's Emily Stewart.
Melbourne-based skincare company Ego Pharmaceuticals is a small business that's had success exporting to the Middle East.
We launched into the Middle East 15 years ago when it was really quite unheard of for a small to medium enterprise to go to the Middle East, and that's been a real boon for us.
Managing Director Alan Oppenheim says the medium-sized company has 23 staff in the region and many local distributors. And Iran is now the company's #1 export market, bringing in $3 million a year. But the wave of unrest sweeping across many Arab nations has affected the business. Plans for expansion into Syria this month have been shelved and profits have been limited in other affected countries.
We launched into Egypt at the end of 2010, and our launch into Egypt, as you'd expect, has been very subdued compared to what we expected. Part of that is the whole Egyptian economy pretty much stopped for January, February as all those protests happened, and all the businesses pretty much shut down for a couple of months.
Australian companies do little business in the countries facing the most violent unrest, which includes Syria, Libya and Yemen. Merchandise exports from Australia to Libya total only $32 million, while exports to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates are around $2 billion each. The Australian government is still negotiating with the Gulf Cooperating Council for a free trade agreement, but Austrade says business is booming, particularly in the building and construction areas, in the more stable countries such as Abu Dhabi and Qatar.
We're seeing our most important Middle East markets in the Gulf continue to do quite well. They've weathered the setback of the so-called Arab Spring quite well, and they're awash in petrodollar revenue now.
Roger Donnelly is the chief economist at the Export Finance and Insurance Corporation, the federal government's export credit agency. He says while the Middle East accounts for only a small proportion of Australian exports, it's growing. Dubai was the first Middle Eastern country to take off, but it suffered a downturn after the global financial crisis. Since then, many Australian companies are branching out to nearby locations that have only recently become more open markets, such as Abu Dhabi, Qatar and Saudi Arabia.
There are big plans of investment that are getting underway at the moment. That Australian companies are quite excited about, clinching contracts to build aluminium smelters, railways, agribusiness projects and so forth.
JML Group is a Newcastle-based engineering and construction company, but over half its business comes from the Middle East.
There's a fairly modest skill base in the Middle East, which is why I think companies like ours have been successful.
JML has worked on major infrastructure projects in Dubai, Abu Dhabi and Bahrain and is tendering for a project in Oman. So far, the company has stayed away from hotspot areas, but Michael Lavis says they would consider it if staff are willing to go.
I think there's a lot of opportunities in those markets, particularly with obviously when damage gets done by the activities there. There's obviously reconstruction possibilities.
Roger Donnelly agrees that the unrest may lead to more opportunities.
If we do see these countries make successful democratic transitions, and that in turn leads to more liberal rules-based market economies, opportunities for investors and traders will increase, and it will be an exciting frontier for Australians to grow their businesses.
Whether that sentiment comes to reality will depend on how quickly the region settles down from its current troubles.